Hey, welcome everybody. Hope everybody's having a great day. Today we are going to be jumping right into it. We are going to be discussing Module 2, Chapter 2. So Module 2 of the Civil Air Patrol Aerospace Dimensions. Module 2 is Aircraft Systems and Airports. And Chapter 2 is Airports. This is actually a fairly long module, fairly long chapters. Some other modules have many more chapters in them, but they are shorter chapters. So this is probably going to be a little bit more in depth, and I hope that you stick with it. Feel free, if you'd like to, you can go ahead, since this is going to be on YouTube, if you want to review this in chunks, feel free to do so. Once we have this video up online and we're not streaming live, I'll try to put in the description down below exactly where the different topics are. For instance, we're going to be talking about the FAA, we'll be talking about airports, and we'll be talking about the flight patterns and flight profile. So go ahead and feel free to look for something specific that you'd like. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so as always, a quick introduction to how to use the video series. Our recommendation is always that you read the material first. If you're a Civil Air Patrol member, go ahead and read your material first. And then when you're done with that, go ahead and watch our videos. After you get done reading it, everything will kind of click in your brain. Things that you didn't understand will all of a sudden, hopefully you'll understand better. Things that you did understand, it'll lock into your brain once you've seen it, heard it, and read it. Once you're all done, feel free, go ahead and do some of the hands-on materials that are in your book. And then when you're all done with that, review your notes, go take your test. There's no reason, I know you got it. You'll do great. So, and if you don't feel good about it, come watch the videos again. You can watch these videos over and over, and you can read the material over and over. Take notes. Okay, so here's what we want to do for our learning outcomes. So the first thing we want to do is we want to understand the basic layout of a general aviation airport, identifying taxiway, runway signs, and markings. We're actually going to do that towards the end of the tonight. And then explain the role of the FAA. We're going to break that down into some of the different groups inside of the FAA that help everybody out. And then we're going to, the first thing we're actually going to do is we're going to identify the different phases of a flight profile. And lastly, we're going to touch upon briefly the phonetic alphabet. Okay. All right, so the flight profile. So if you really think about it, airplanes, when we do a mission, if you're in the military or if you're general aviation and you're going from point A to point B in your airplane, they really all follow a similar flight profile. And so if you're able to really break down each phase of the flight, it really makes flying a lot more accessible. It makes it it's not so hard anymore. It's like anything. If you look at, everything in flying, it'll make your brain go crazy. But just like the dashboard of an airplane, there's individual, areas. Everything's kind of grouped in a section. And as long as you understand that section, and then you go learn the next section, all of a sudden it's very simple. People that fly with you are going to be amazed that you have all this knowledge. And really, as long as you break it down, it's simple. And so, relatively simple. And so the same thing with the flight in general. So we are going to look at the flight profile. Everything from, when the airplane is what we call cold and dark, which means it's sitting there on the taxi yards or on the ramp or inside the hangar. Nothing's turned on, everything's turned off, all the way till, taxiing and tying it back down. So let's go ahead and take a look at these. So the first thing you want to do is when the airplane is parked, you want to do a walk around the airplane. You're also going to be checking some things inside of the aircraft. Now, one of the things that's super important for pilots is we have what's called a checklist. And that checklist for each of these phases will have distinct steps that you go through. Now, you can go online and you can do a search for, say, Cessna 172 checklist or Cessna 182 checklist. My favorite, Cessna 210. Cessna 210 checklist. And then you can, just kind of think to yourself, how would I do this? Walk through the steps. Imagine yourself as the person that's going to be flying. And just like this lady here, she's doing a good job. She's checking everything. The big thing that's really important is that you don't want to rush this. A lot of people will come across a pre-flight, and it's just something that they have to do. They were taught how to do it in their training when they were getting their pilot's license. And then when they get out there, this is their airplane. If it's an airplane they own, they know it. They are the only ones that fly it, so they're not worried about it. So they rush through the pre-flight. Don't do that. If there's any problems at all, you want to be able to determine that now. You don't want to be in the air and then all of a sudden there's a problem. Also, double check that gas. Make sure you have as much as you really think. I'll tell you, this is already going to be a long video, but I'll tell you a quick 1-minute story. I was at Oshkosh one time, and we were rushing through to get back up into the air because at Oshkosh, there's a million airplanes. And so we were in a big line to get ready to go back into the air, and we had a fuel truck that gave us fuel. So we did all of our calculations based on a full fuel tank, and we didn't go back out afterwards and check because we were in a rush. It turns out that the individual that fueled our airplane, surprised they weren't better trained. They didn't give us full fuel tanks. They fill it to what's called the bottom of the tabs instead of all the way up, and that's quite a few gallons difference. Thankfully, it didn't cause us a problem, but when we landed, I checked the fuel. We had less than I expected, and so that was a shock. So always check everything, especially that fuel. Next thing after you're done with your pre-flight, you're going to go ahead and you're going to taxi the runway. Now, if you're at a bigger airport, you're actually going to go on the radio and you're going to ask for permission. You're going to talk to air traffic control. If you're at a smaller airport, there may not be air traffic control, so you're just going to go ahead and taxi the runway. And by the way, this video is from Embry-Riddle, so I want to give them credit for this video. If you're interested in flight training, Embry-Riddle is a fantastic organization. They actually have college programs to learn how to fly and to become a professional pilot. So once you're taxiing, one of the important things is a couple things. So one, you want to make sure that you've tracked that center line. As you can see here, this pilot is doing a fantastic job. That front nose wheel is right on that line. When I was learning how to fly, I always had a tendency of putting my nose wheel about 5 feet to the left. My instructor always yelled at me, rightfully so. It takes just as much effort to have the airplane 5 feet to the left as it does to actually fly on the center line or taxi on the center line. The other thing you want to make sure that you're doing is that you want to adjust for the wind. You turn into the wind. And the other thing that you want to make sure is don't go too fast. You want to make sure that you're always able to slow down or stop as quick as possible. Lastly, you want to make sure that your eyes are outside of that airplane. Too many people, when they fly, they think they're going in a straight line, taxiing to the runway, and so their eyes will go down and they'll look at their maps, they'll look at their checklists. Keep your eyes out. Animal, debris, something could be, debris could fly, into the wind and push into the taxiway. You could run into it. Keep your eyes outside of the airplane during this phase. This is not a time for your eyes to be inside the airplane. Before you take off and when you get to the end of the runway, what last thing you're going to do before you actually take off is you're going to do what's called an engine run up. Now, this is different for military aircraft. It's different for jet aircraft, and this is really for piston aircraft. So one of the things you want to do is you're going to follow your checklist, but typically you're going to push the fuel in. Your engine's going to come up. And you're going to check a few things. You're going to check the magnetos, we'll get into magnetos in another day. If you go to chapter 1, we talk about magnetos. It's basically a spark plug kind of thing for an airplane. And so you'll check 2 of them because you want to make sure if one system fails, you have the other system. But when you turn it, it'll go down a little bit. The engine RPM will drop a little bit. And so you want to make sure that you see that. And you want to listen. So much we think about with our eyes, but you really want to be listening. Because if you hear any stuttering with the engine, anything doesn't sound right, you really want to know. And the last thing you're going to do is you're going to move the controls back, forward. You're going to move your feet on the rudder back and forth. You're going to visually look out the window, make sure that they're actually doing what you're supposed to be doing. One time I was flying in an airplane that was a different airplane for me, and then I went to go pull. Thankfully, this was during the engine run-up. It wasn't during the takeoff. So I went to go pull back on the yoke, and I am 6'8". I am very tall, and the yoke hit my knees. That is not something I would want to figure it out on takeoff. So make sure you don't do it a little bit. Fully pull it back, fully push it forward, fully 90 degrees. Make sure that thing works all the way. Don't just do a little bit. I wouldn't have realized it if I did it a little bit. Once you're done with that, it's time to go. You are going to lock your windows down. Make sure if you have anything loose, make sure that double check. Make sure your seatbelt is really nice and tight. There are pilots, unfortunately, that's really sad that they have died because they have done something very minor in the airplane, relatively. And they died because they went out the front of the windshield. And that sounds super sad, and it is super sad. One of those airplanes actually flew again like a couple weeks later. There was very minimal damage. If they had their seatbelt on, no problem. Just like your car. Don't go out, don't go moving in a vehicle without a seatbelt on. It's a really stupid way to end your life. So with, when you're taking off, the other things too, you're going to go down the runway. You're going to get to what's called VR, which is velocity rotate. So when you get to that speed, you're going to slowly pull it up. Don't yank it back or you're going to like that, because if you do that, then you'll actually stall the airplane and just, pop it right back on the ground. Everything nice and smooth, just nice and smooth. And then all of a sudden, you'll just lift off the ground like you didn't do anything at all. And then what you really want to do is you really want to be listening to the engine. You want to keep your eyes outside. You want to know if that engine were to fail. Most engine failures happen right after takeoff. So you want to know, you want to try get as much altitude as you can, as fast as you can, because if the engine does fail, you might have a chance to get back to the runway. But you may not. Most of the time you will not have, especially in general aviation aircraft, you will not have enough time to get back to the runway. So you want to make sure that you're looking ahead and thinking to yourself, okay, if my engine were to fail right now, where am I going to land this? So that's always a good thing to constantly be thinking about. But listen to that engine. Make sure the engine sounds good. If it doesn't sound good, get the airplane back on the ground. You're always much better off having, wishing you were in the, you're always better off being on the ground, wishing you were in the air, than being in the air, wishing you were in the ground. Now, we are up in the air. We're cruising. This airplane here is cruising along at 12,500. This is a Cessna 182 Turbo. It's one of my dream airplanes. And one of the things that's really important is there's a lot of accidents that really could be avoided at this phase. Pilots, once they get into the cruise phase, they hit the autopilot and they just relax. They sit back. I've seen pilots, not in big planes, but, general aviation, I've seen them, they're watching YouTube videos that they stored on their phone. Sometimes they're watching airplane videos. Like they're flying in an airplane, they're piloting an airplane, they're watching a video about flying. I've seen that. So anyways, you want to keep your eyes on the engines, on all the instruments. You want to make sure the engines are operating what you think they should be. Make sure that they're not burning more fuel than you think. Make sure the engine temperature looks good, oil looks good. You want to make sure there's no icing on the wings. I came from up in New York, so it was cold and snowy and windy and icy a lot of times. So you want to make sure that you don't get any ice on the wings. These airplanes don't like ice on the wings, and most of these general aviation aircraft don't have any way to handle the ice on the wings. They can't break the ice off, and so you want to just do all this stuff. You want to make sure if you have any problems that you're able to get it down. Now, it's not like you have to sit there and just work yourself to the bone. Enjoy your flight. But don't be distracted and just, kind of sit back and become a passenger. If you're the pilot, you are the pilot, especially if you have other people in the aircraft. They're going to look for you to become a professional. All right, so that is cruise. All right. Now, you finally get into where you're going, and now you're going to have to descend. At some point, you're going to do a calculation. You're going to say, okay, I'm at this height, and before I get to the airport, I have to get to this height, and it's going to take X amount of time to descend to that level. And so X amount of time before you get to the airport, you're going to start your descent. And then you want to get yourself to a good point. You're either going to fly directly to the runway, depending on the type of approach you're doing, or you'll enter a traffic pattern. We're going to talk about traffic patterns in a few minutes. But the most important thing here is I like to keep a little bit of power in a general aviation aircraft. I like to keep a little bit of power into that as I'm just before I touch down. I feel it helps me guide the airplane, kind of slide it into the runway a little bit more, as opposed to going full power off. Some pilots, as soon as they know they make the runway, they just shut the power off. And I feel like sometimes if you do that, you don't have as much control because you don't have that forward thrust. And so now it's all drag. And so you can kind of, some people are really good at it, but I've always found that, you kind of touch down a little harder than if you just gave it a little bit of power. And the other thing too is right before you land, make sure the parking brake is not set. I've seen pilots blow a tire because They accidentally engaged for some reason the parking brake. Different airplanes are different. A Cessna you pull out and turn, so it's a little bit harder to set that on accident. But there's other aircraft that there's a lever on the ground, and sometimes it's easier when you're fumbling around looking for something on the ground to accidentally bump it up a little bit. So you want to make sure that your parking brake is free. Also, definitely on the takeoff too. A lot of pilots will set the parking brake, do their run up, and then they go and they take off, and they're wondering why their airplane, they'll get the airplane off. It'll pull through it. But they wonder, this airplane's not accelerating as fast as I think. A lot of times it's because they left their parking brake on, and that really does burn that up. So you want to make sure your parking brake's off. All right, once you're done, it's time to taxi back to the ramp. So this is the opposite of the taxi to the runway. This is actually a great video of a B-17. It's one of the last remaining B-17s that's still operational. And so you'll notice they are crawling. They are not going to go fast with this airplane. And I can guarantee you these pilots that are flying this B-17 are very professional pilots. You do not get to fly a B-17 unless you know what you're doing. So you want to make sure, again, that you're going very slow. Now, the challenge is that a lot of times this is really when you're the most tired, especially if you had a long flight. If you were up in the air for 4 hours or so, or maybe even longer, especially if you're military, you get an 8 or 9 hour flight or longer. You have to like kind of revive yourself, whether slap yourself in the face if you need to, don't do that in front of your passengers. They'll think you're crazy, but somehow you got to get yourself ready to go. Because when you taxi that aircraft, you want to make sure that you're used to going fast now. So you have to get yourself in the mindset of, okay, now I got to slow down again. So keep your speed slow. Make sure that you can, and every aircraft is different. Some aircrafts can stop really fast. Other aircrafts, really kind of take a little while, especially if you have a lot of people and fuel on the airplane. It can take a little while to stop. Again, it's the whole force equals mass times acceleration thing, right? The more mass you have and the faster you're going, the more force it takes to slow you down, right? So you got to be again. This is the total opposite of taxiing to the runway. Your eyes should be outside. Don't worry about packing up your radios and your maps, and do all that when you get to your ramp. And lastly, one thing here, I put in stereo cockpit. I do want to talk about that. When you are in a taxi phase, a takeoff phase, a landing phase, taxi back to the ramp phase, do not feel bad for telling your passengers, especially if they're being chatty, to please, keep it quiet, right? So in aviation, we say stereo cockpit. So stereo cockpit means that's it. All conversations are done. The only time somebody should be saying something is if they see a problem. And then everybody, no matter who they are in the airplane, is allowed to say, hey, you've got a problem. Watch out for that, right? Somebody may not notice it. Don't assume that you got to make sure that, the pilot, you think that you're going to see everything, but sometimes your passengers may see something you don't. So make sure you listen to them. But yeah, stereo cockpit. Keep the noise in the cockpit down during those phases. And lastly, we have the shutdown and the tie down. So once we get to where you're going to go, whether it's in a hangar or you're going to tie it down out in the grass or on a pad outside of the airport, you want to tie it down. There are a lot of airplanes. Airplanes, what do? They have wings, right? So think about if you get a strong wind. Strong wind will pick up that airplane. If it's not tied down, it'll flip it right over. You can ask some of the folks out in Lake Placid, New York, over in the Adirondack Mountains. They'll get wind coming down there. And I was, that's one of my favorite places to fly when I was younger. And you just watch the airplanes just lifting up, down. So you want to make sure that you can tie these airplanes down. This is something that if you're a cadet or you're a senior member that's looking to get into flying, this is something you can practice at home. I actually took, when I was learning, I took a piece of wood and I took 2 pieces of metal pole that you can get at the Home Depot or Lowe's for $1 a piece. And I put 2 of them and I put an eye hook on one. And I just sat there and I practiced, knots. I did that for the fire department too. Just practice knots for days and days and days until you do them so good that you don't even think about it. Your hands just do it. Again, that makes it look like you're a professional. And so when you are doing knots, make sure that you're learning how to do a knot that's not a slip knot. You don't want something that's going to slip. It has to be able to hold. So if something pulls on it, you don't want it to loosen up at all. You want it to hold down. There's a lot of, I was, making this presentation, I was watching a lot of YouTube videos and people, doing tie down knots. I was shocked how many of them were actually doing something that would slip. They had, they were probably okay, if they were just going in, tying down on a calm day, no wind was going to be there, and they just wanted to quickly tie it down so they could go next door to go get some food real quick and come back and go, continue their flight. But you wouldn't want to tie it down that way, permanently. So definitely learn how to do a good tie down knot. That's something you can do, and you don't have to pay $150 an hour to do it. And if you know how to do a good tie down knot, that will impress your instructor. And that's it, man. That's your flight profile. You started and you finished, and you kept everybody safe. And that's, in the end, that's what it's about. And the other thing that's important is you do not have to be a paid individual. This doesn't have to be your job for you to be a professional. If you're a pilot, the world expects you to be a professional. So do everything you can. Continue to learn, continue to study, continue to learn from other people's mistakes. Look at accident reports. It's really important. So, and if you're a cadet or even a senior member that's just would love to start flying and hasn't started learning how to fly yet, these are all things that you can do before you start spending the $150 an hour to take flight lessons. Okay, so that is the flight profile portion of it. Now we're going to switch over to airports. Okay, airports. So airports really come in two flavors. So we have controlled airports and we have uncontrolled airports. So really the difference between a controlled airport and an uncontrolled airport is that a controlled airport has FAA controllers at it, right? So the FAA controllers are actually helping you to separate the aircraft, right? So the pilot is always in control. Even if you're at a controlled airport and the air traffic controller tells you to do something, if it's not safe, you don't do it, right? So I don't like it when people say that controllers are in control of the aircraft at a controlled airport. That's not true. If you're a pilot in command, you are in control of that airplane. Now, the controllers, they are there to help you, right? They're not there to tell you. They're there to help you. And sometimes if you're in a really busy airspace, you better listen to them because if you don't, they can't help you. They can't help you. They can't help the next airplane that you could possibly be turning into. So you really want to make sure that you're listening to them. But they're really there to make sure that they can give you guidance between taxiing to the runway, taking off, getting into the air, right outside of the airport. And then on the way back in, they're going to be responsible for making sure you're spaced between the other aircraft that are landing, making sure that they give you the right runway to use, and then clearing you to land. And then ultimately the exact opposite. You land, and then they give you the help to get you taxied over to where you're eventually going to shut down the airplane. And then at an uncontrolled airport, it could be somebody's backyard. You may not have anybody there. It could not even be paved. It could be a grass runway like this picture shows. So you really want to make sure that you're always being very diligent, but you are ultimately, you have to communicate much more with other airplanes. There may be somebody on the ground that could help you with the wind, or if there's any fuel at the airport, things of that nature. But it's much more of a community approach to landing and to taking off. You work together with the other pilots as opposed to you working with an air traffic controller and the air traffic controller working with all of the airplanes. Okay, so there's a couple of groups here that we need to mention. And honestly, we need to give thanks to them. Federal Aviation Administration. I like all of our government entities, but I will say that I love the FAA probably more than I love any other group, except maybe fire and rescue people. These individuals have an incredibly difficult job. They have a lot of training. They're all, they all go to college for this. This is not something that, they pick up, take a certification class on a weekend, and all of a sudden, they're in charge of, 747s with 400 people on them. These are people that are highly trained. Also, by the way, if you're interested in it, most of these folks are also very highly paid, and it's really a good career. So, if you're somebody that maybe doesn't want to become a pilot because you don't know if you want to be traveling so much and be away from home so much, an FAA controller is a good way of being part of aviation, but still maintaining your house and having a normal kind of shift. So here's one thing I want you to think about. So while we're going through the rest of the presentation, what does it take to be an air traffic controller? We're going to talk about, we talked about the flight profile, all these different stages of the flight. And what kinds of stuff do you think they have to be ready for in the future? We have things like spacecraft now that are landing, rockets that are landing themselves. You have to be ready for that. We have airplanes that are getting faster and faster. We're starting to work on airplanes again that can break the sound barrier over land. So airplanes are going to be traveling faster and faster. And there's a lot of other things that they just have to be ready for in the future. So drones, right? There's lots of drones now. FAA manages the drones in the United States. So think about all that stuff. And here's a couple of groups inside of the FAA. So everybody always thinks of the air traffic control tower, but there's a lot more than the air traffic control tower. So the first group that most people will talk to when they fly is actually a flight service station, an FSS. So a flight service station is really a big community of air traffic controllers, and they really help you at the beginning phase of your flight. You don't talk to these folks once you're in the air. But you can, but you talk to them when before you leave, and you talk to them after you get on the ground. These are the folks you talk to get your weather briefings. These are the folks that you talk to. Excuse the noise. These are the people that you will talk to get your weather briefings, to file your flight plans, all of that nature. They'll warn you if there's anything going on in the environment, in the air. If there's any areas that you think you want to fly through, but maybe you can't. Maybe the president's in that area, so the airspace is shut down, or there's military operations going on, so you can't fly through that area. You don't want to be in the area when two F-16s are dogfighting. But again, these folks are like ATC, but they don't control you or talk to you when you're actually in the air. Okay. Air Route Traffic Control Centers. This is another group of folks that are also kind of in a building. They're not, at the airport. Sometimes they're at an airport. Depends on the group. But typically they don't have to be at an airport. They're not in the tower. And they control an entire area. So once you leave the airport, you will talk to an air traffic control center. So for instance, here in Greenville, South Carolina, which is where I am based out of, we would talk to Atlanta Center. So if you look at the map, and let's say I was to fly to, let's say Los Angeles, right? I would be talking to Atlanta Center, and then they would switch me to Memphis Center, and then most likely, depending on if I went north or south, they would transfer me to Fort Worth Center, and then Albuquerque Center, and then finally Los Angeles Center. So that's 5 different groups of people that I would talk to. And also, inside of each of those centers, especially Albuquerque, Fort Worth, I'm probably going to talk to a couple different people as I'm going along through the centers. So a lot of private pilots, when they leave the airport, even if they're leaving a Class C, they don't request flight following. And they just say, nope, I don't want to talk to anybody else. I think that's a mistake. I think it's really great to talk to the centers. The centers want to be there. Air traffic controllers are there to help you. They want to help you. That's their entire job. They do that job because they want to help. And so when when you're doing flight following, they keep you on radar. And so you can keep them in your ear so they can tell you if there's another airplane around you. The other airplane, they may not be talking to air traffic control, but the air traffic controllers can see them on radar. So they can warn you and tell you, hey, at 11 o'clock at 10 miles, there's an airplane. Keep an eye out for them, right? They'll ask you, do you have a visual? And then they'll try to separate you from them, even though the other airplane's not even talking to them. And so they'll do that, and they'll let you know if there's any weather on the way. Typically, you can hear other pilots talking. Maybe they're talking about turbulence, things of that nature. So these are all great things that the air traffic control centers can do. Also, not to be negative, but a lot of things in flying, right? We plan on for when bad things happen, right? So emergency planning is very important if you're a pilot. And if you're on the radio already with air traffic control, and let's say you lose an engine, you can tell air traffic control, I'm declaring an emergency. I just lost an engine, and I'm going to glide and I'm going to land this thing somewhere in the next 5 miles, right? So that's important. Otherwise, your blip would just disappear from the radar screen, and they wouldn't know if you landed someplace, and they wouldn't be on the radio talking to you. Or if you had an emergency, that's one more thing you'd have to do. You'd have to look up you would go 121.5, which is emergency frequency. That's what you would do. But still, you would have to like do something with the radios. Now, most people, we tune 121.5 as emergency frequency, so we can just hit a button. It automatically switches over to 121.5. That's the right thing to do. But if you're already talking to an air traffic, controller, you've already got on the radio. You just push the button and you talk. So that's a great thing. Use them. Your taxes are paying for them. So use them anyways. All right. And finally, we get to the air traffic control tower itself. This is what most people think of when they think of the FAA and air traffic control. So these are the individuals that are actually controlling the ground traffic at the airport, as well as the arriving aircraft, the departing aircraft, within a certain amount of miles from the airport. Typically 20 miles. If you're general aviation, you have to talk to a Class C airport within 20 nautical miles. And typically you would call them up well before that 20 nautical miles. And there's lots of rules there I'm not going to get into here. This isn't a pilot training class, but these are the folks that really help you there. And in a really busy Class B for B, just B Bravo, just think of B for big. These are the big airports: Los Angeles, Atlanta, New York, LaGuardia, JFK, all those airports. These are the really big airports. There are a lot of air traffic controllers that work on these airports, and they are ultra important to be able to keep everybody safe. It is absolutely amazing if you think about how many flights there are a day, how many people are flying every day, that we very rarely, I mean, flying, especially commercial airline flying, I mean, it is so safe. I mean, it is just incredibly safe. There are accidents, things do happen. But if you compare it to almost anything else, I mean, there's almost nothing safer you could be doing than being in an airplane flying. And you think about all these aircraft that are moving in and out, and the weather that they're flying through, and how fast you're going, and you got to land on a little tiny runway that's straight, and all the things that could go wrong, things that could break, maintenance on all these different airplanes, just thousands of airplanes that are flying. And it's absolutely amazing how the system works so good. So again, if you're somebody that's an air traffic control, or if you're know somebody that is, please thank you or send my thanks. All right. So now we're going to talk about runway layout. So if we look at the airport, airports aren't very good unless you have a runway, unless you're a helicopter. Then you just need a helipad. But for those of us with fixed wings, we need a place to actually land on. It's nice, long, and straight. And so if you look at a magnetic compass, right, you have north, south, east, west, and all the degrees around. And so if you look at the runway numbers, the runway number is actually the magnetic heading plus or minus 5 degrees. So whatever it's closer to. So for instance, here, if we look at the top right, you'll see 27R, 27 right. And so what that means is that that runway is facing 270 degrees plus or minus 5 degrees. So it could be 266 degrees. It could be 273 degrees. And so, but you have to, that's the direction of the runway. Now, if you have two runways that are next to each other, one of them will be called right, one will be called left. If you had 3 runways, the one in the middle would be called C for center. I have seen overseas, I saw a runway one time that said middle, and so I put down middle down here at the bottom too, but it's typically center in the United States. The other thing too you want to make sure is that when you're landing, you want to make sure that when you get in the airplanes, we have what's called a heading indicator or a directional gyro. And so it's an instrument, just like you see here. It's instead of a magnetic compass that's floating up higher, it's something that we can set to the correct direction. And it's really important when you're landing. If you're landing on runway 27 right and your directional gyro says 210 degrees, something's wrong. Either your directional gyro is not working, it's not set right, or you're about to land on the wrong runway. So you definitely want to make sure that they agree. So a lot of in Rochester, New York, there's 2 runways that are right next to each other, and both their thresholds are real close to each other. Runways 25 and 28. Now 28 is a much bigger runway. 25 is a smaller runway, but it's still a pretty good. It's still a big runway for general aviation. They can land light jets on it, but the thresholds are real close. And so every once in a while, you hear of a pilot almost landing or maybe landing on a wrong runway. So you want to make sure that whatever runway you're lined up on, if you think you're landing on runway 28 and your heading indicator is showing 250 degrees, then you're lined up on the wrong runway. Or vice versa. If you think you're landing on 25, but your directional gyro says 280, you're landing on the wrong runway. So very important. All right. So these are the runway layouts. All right. So now, if you're not at a big airport, you are going to enter a traffic pattern. So the traffic patterns are, again, used by uncontrolled airports typically, and they help the arrival and departure of aircraft. Again, this is more of a community effort. You need to be able to fit into the traffic. If it is a Saturday morning and it is beautiful outside, and there's a really good chance that there's going to be a lot of general aviation airplanes flying at that airport. For small times, that little airport may get busier than some commercial airports. So traffic patterns. Every airport will have its own traffic patterns. You need to look online to see what the traffic patterns are. You want to know them before you get to the airport. And the other thing too is you want to pay attention to the wind. So the wind is really important for the traffic pattern. You want to usually enter with the wind. So if you look at the top picture, the wind is coming towards us. And so the airplane is going to enter either at a 45-degree angle towards the airport, or he's going to enter straight into the entry downwind portion of that traffic pattern. And you do that so this way when you come back around and you land, you're landing onto the runway, you'll be landing against the wind. And you want to do that because let's say the wind is 10 knots, or we'll use miles per hour since we're in the U.S., 10 miles an hour. Well, if your landing speed of your airplane is, say, 70 miles an hour, if you are landing with the wind, it would be pushing you. And so when your wheels touch down, you'd actually be going 80 miles an hour. So your ground speed takes into account the wind. So if you were landing at 70 miles an hour, your ground speed would actually be 80. Now, if you landed against the wind, you would now be going 60 miles an hour. You would take that 10 miles an hour away from your ground speed. And so, when your wheels touch down, 60 miles an hour is a lot less than 80 miles an hour. You'll put down a lot less, you'll use a lot less runway. The wind won't push you down the runway. And it'll actually help to buffer the wing a little bit. So definitely make sure that, that you're landing into the wind. And that's all. If you're going to the Navy, you get an aircraft carrier. You'll see there before they launch all the planes, the aircraft carrier will turn into the wind and will speed up. They speed up because they want to get as much wind into the airplanes that are being catapulted off. So, okay. So that is the traffic patterns. All right, we talked about wind here quite a bit already. So now how do you know what the wind's doing, right? So most airports, they will have a windsock. So this is what a windsock looks like. If it's a new windsock and it's not old and crusty and, or got snow on it or iced up, typically what will happen is it will point itself windward. And so you want to fly, if it's like in this case, for me, it's this picture, the plane, the windsock is pointing left to right. So you would land into the windsock. So you would land right to left. And then you can tell the speed of the wind by how the angle of that windsock. I forget what it exactly is, but I want to say it's about 15 knots. And that'll be fully deflected up. And that's important because a lot of general aviation aircraft, if that wind is directly across the runway, then and if it's at 15 knots, that might actually exceed what your airplane is able to land at. So you want to make sure that you kind of get an idea of that wind. Now, the best thing you can do is actually probably get somebody who might have just landed the airplane and ask them. They might be on the ground and they could say, "Oh yeah, that wind is that's about 30 knots, and it'll blow you right over." So and then you go find someplace else to land until the wind changes direction or calms down. Don't ever get yourself to a point where you're dedicated to an airport where you have to land at that airport. Because if you're going to set yourself up for having a problem where the wind or snow or something else going on. And if you are like in a mindset of that's my airport, that's where I'm landing, then you could do something unsafe. You're much better off landing in another airport that maybe the runway is in a different direction, so that the runway is more into the wind and not across the wind. And you could land there safely. Wait time, even if you got to get a taxi to go home, park the airplane there, and then when it's safe, go back and move the airplane back to your home base. Lastly, for wind direction, if you're at a big airport, you have what's called ATIS, Automatic Terminal Information Service. And so this is a radio frequency that you'll listen to, and they'll tell you things like the level the clouds are at, the visibility, the wind, if there's any problems at the airport, things of that nature. So you want to listen to that. Now, when you listen to it, they're going to actually say information, and then this is where the phonetic alphabet comes in. So Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Fox, Hotel, on and on and on. If you're in CAP, you really do need to learn your phonetic alphabet. We use it all the time. If you're going to be a pilot, you have to know the phonetic alphabet. It's mandatory. One of the things I recommend doing is when you are driving, look at the license plates of vehicles around you, in front of you. And then as you see them, read off their license plate using phonetics. You'll get to a point very, very quickly where you could read a book phonetically, and it'll be great for you. So anyways, so you're listening to the radio, and they give you this information, and they'll say information Bravo. So then when you talk to the air traffic controllers, one of the first things you'll do is you'll tell them, I have information Bravo. Now, if the information has changed from the time that you received the radio, then they'll tell you the new information, and they'll tell you information Charlie now active. So you definitely want to listen to that. That's good. A lot of times we listen to ATIS the whole way. We get once we start getting a little bit closer to an airport, we'll tune in the ATIS. We want to know that well in advance, because it also tells us the runways that are in use. So if you're at a bigger airport, you want to make sure, if you know the runways that they're using well in advance, you can now start to plan. You can kind of, if you're in a bigger airplane or a military airplane, you'll be able to kind of understand the traffic patterns and the flight approaches that you'll be given by air traffic control, by the approach controllers. And so they'll be able to tell you that. And so you can kind of figure a lot of that out before you get to the airport. It makes your job easier. You can pre-tune in the radios, and it makes your job just nice and smooth coming into the airport. You want to make sure when you come into the airport, when you're landing the airplane, so much stuff is happening so fast. You want to eliminate as much work as you possibly can. Especially again, it might be the most tired you are, in the whole flight, because you've been flying for a while. All right. Let's see here. So I clicked the button. Let's see. Let's try it again. Hang on. Okay. Runway markings. So there's typically three types of runways. There is a visual approach runway, there's a non-precision approach runway, and there's a precision approach runway. So we're going to talk about the three of those. If you are looking at a visual approach runway, that's really what it is. You can really only land on it when you can have good visibility. So these are your smaller airports. Visual approach runway can also be a grass strip. Typically, the only thing you're going to get on a visual approach runway is the runway number and the dotted line and the taxi lines coming off. One thing that's interesting about this runway, you'll notice there's only one taxiway, and it's towards the front of the picture here. There's no taxiway at the end. So you actually would have to, if you were landing on 3.5, you would stop the airplane, you would turn it around, come back to get to the taxiway. I always got to remember that my camera goes the opposite way. So you would come back and then you would exit the taxiway. And then, or vice versa, if you had to take off at the other end, you would actually taxi out to the other end of the runway, turn around, and then take off towards you. So that's a visual approach runway. All right, a non-precision approach runway. So non-precision approach runways, they're very similar to a visual approach runway, but they add a couple things. They add threshold, so it makes it a little easier for the pilot to see where the exact start of the runway is. And they also give you an aiming point. So when you're landing an airplane that's a little bit faster than general aviation, you want your eyes will kind of be aiming at that runway point. Your wheels will touch down typically before the aiming point. But these are the things it gives you. There's typically is instrument approaches, but the approaches are not precision approaches. So that means that you can be in the clouds, and you can still do your approach into a non-precision runway, but you have to get out of the clouds at a much higher altitude than you would at, say, a precision runway, which we're going to talk about next. Okay. Lastly, we're going to talk about precision runways. So precision runway, you get all the bells and whistles. You get all the instrument approaches, you get all the lighting. They give you a touchdown marker where you're going to try to touch down on. They give you your aiming point. They give you markers separated out by 500 feet and 1,000 feet in between the sections of markings, with 500 feet in between each marking. So this way you know exactly if you're landing, you're getting close to the end of the runway, you know how much runway you have left. So the biggest thing about these is you can almost land at these airports until right at the very last second without being able to see the runway. One of the very thrilling things that you can do as a pilot when you get your instrument license and you get the skill level, just because you get the license doesn't mean you should do this. But once you get the skill level up, one of the fascinating and really exciting things is to know, say, your airplane's coming down and you're in the clouds, you see nothing, but you're looking at all your instruments and they're telling you that you're right on the line to land, and so you're basically stuck in a cotton ball. You can't see anything. And then all of a sudden you're getting 500, 600 feet, 700 feet before the ground level for the airport, and your palms are getting sweaty, especially if you're new. Your palms are getting sweaty. You're like, the ground's getting closer. It's getting closer, and then all of a sudden you literally go from not being able to see anything. It's just a whiteout, especially if it's in the daytime, to just woof, the runway just like pops up in front of you. It just appears. It's like somebody hit a button and just like pops in. And then you're right on it. And I'll tell you what, if you do good and you got passengers, you do that, you're their hero. Because I'll tell you what, they're nervous. They may not tell you they're nervous unless they fly a lot. They're nervous. They're like, because they know they're getting closer to the ground and they can see you concentrating and they can see you just constantly scanning the instruments and they can't see the runway. And so you put that thing down like that, you are a hero to them. But before you do that, make sure you are a hero. Make sure you'd have the skill to do that. You don't want to be a bad story someday. All right. So a couple of markings on the airports. So over to the left here, we have displaced thresholds. So a displaced threshold is white arrows that are pointing to the threshold of the runway. And so the displaced, I can't say that word right now, displaced threshold, you can't land on it, but you can taxi on it, you can take off. Matter of fact, that's what it's for. So you can, like in this case, this looks like a smaller airport. So you can see over there, you can see the taxiway. And actually there is a taxiway down here because I can see the line from it. But there may not be a taxiway up there. And this doesn't look like that big of a runway. And so what you would do is you would put your airplane right at the very beginning of those arrows, and you could use the whole thing to take off. And I see a big mountain in front of that. So you might want to take the whole thing and try to get some speed up so you can start getting some altitude. So then the other thing too is that if you look over to the right-hand side, that is a blast pad. So a blast pad is similar to a threshold in that it's an extension of the runway. The difference is you can't do anything on that blast pad. It doesn't have the strength for you to taxi on it. It doesn't have the strength for you to take off on it. It is there just really for the jet wash, to make sure it's not going to burn grass. It's not going to have any debris. It's a warning for other people that, I don't know why you would be behind a runway. But if an airplane's taking off, it's kind of like a visual, hey, maybe I shouldn't stand here. There's really great videos from some airports, like in overseas, one in South America, where there's like a beach that's right in front of the runway. And every time an airplane takes off, everybody gets blown back and people are hanging on to the fence. But anyways, that's what a blast pad's for. Again, the big difference is with the displaced threshold. You can do everything but land. It may look the same as the rest of the runway, but it may not be as strong. So when you land, you could crack the runway. An Airbus 380 in Oshkosh one year, and not at the fault of the pilot, but they landed on a runway, and the A380 is such a big, heavy airplane that when it landed, it actually cracked the runway. And then it was a real pain to get it out of there. So you want to make sure that you do not land on the displaced threshold. Okay. Runway closed. So this is Merrill C. Meigs. I do a whole story about Merrill C. Meigs on one of my Aerospace Live nights. If you're interested in that, comment down below. I'll give you a link to that discussion. But Merrill C. Meigs was shut down in 2003, and they put a big X on it. Now, I'm not going to get into politics. I never get into politics on my CAP videos. But the politicians did something pretty unsafe. They actually dug X's into the runways. Other than this, I've never ever seen that done before. Not in an airport that still has airplanes on it. So typically what you'll see a big painted yellow X on the runway. You'll also see a big standing lighted X on the runway. So this way at nighttime, you can know that you can't use that runway. Also, if you're talking to air traffic controllers, they'll tell you. So it's really important to keep track of that. Okay, the runway hold lines. This is very similar to if you were driving a car. You can't cross over the solid lines, and you can cross over the dotted lines, right? So in this case, if you were on the left-hand side and you were going to the right, that means you could, I take that back. If you're going from the left to the right, you have the solid lines in front of you. You can't cross it. You've got to talk to air traffic control, and then air traffic control will give you the permission to cross the line, the runway hold lines. If you are coming the other way, you have the dotted lines. The dotted lines you can cross. So this basically helps to give a visual marker for where you can be entering a runway or you can be leaving the runway. Okay. And then here's some airport signs. We want to point out 4 of them in particular. The red signs are mandatory instruction signs. They typically will tell you where the runway is, or if you have to hold prior to getting clearance to go onto the runway. Where there's an ILS critical hold area, and we'll talk about what that is in just a second. If there's a no entry, maybe there's some maintenance. It could be at an airport that you fly in all the time, but maybe there is somebody doing some work on that taxiway, and so you have to keep your eyes out. There could be a no entry sign, and then if you didn't notice it, you could get yourself in trouble or get somebody else in trouble. So that's no entry. And then the black with the yellow, solid black with the yellow, that is where you are. So if you saw that B in the black with the yellow B, that means you are on taxiway B Bravo. Again, using phonetic alphabets. Or if you saw the 22, you are on runway 22. And so if they cleared you to land on runway 28 and you see a black 22, yellow lettering, you're in trouble. And then going down the runway, if you see the black with the white, that means how much distance you have remaining. And then over to the right-hand side, you have directions and locations. And so we talked about the solid lines and the dotted lines, and that's the first sign there. It's important that those signs are there, especially for airports up in the north, but you'll find them pretty much all airports. And the reason why is if you're in most airports, almost every place in the United States, unless you're like in Florida, they get snow at some point. If you're the further north you are, the more snow you get. And so if you just relied on the markings on the ground, then if you got snow or ice or something, you wouldn't be able to see it. So they have to put the signs up. And one of the things that they'll make sure that they do a really good job of is they'll make sure that they keep those signs clear. So even if if it's snowing outside, you may not be able to see the ground, but they do a really good job of making sure that you can see the signs. ILS critical area boundary. So what that is, if you taxi too far forward, so we talked about the precision approaches, and really all that is it's a radio. And so the radio shoots out at an angle, and so it goes in the front and it goes to the back. And so the airplane coming in for a landing is basically tracking that radio coming all the way down. And if your airplane pulled in front of where that radio antenna is, then you might block the signal going to that airplane, or at least disturb it. And so that's a really bad thing. That pilot might be in the clouds, and he or she really needs to make sure that they can, they can land and they keep themselves lined up with the runway. And so that's what that ILS critical area is. It means don't cross that area, don't get into it. And then finally, the rest of the signs really are for directions. And so if we had two signs next to each other, if we had that the black sign with the yellow B, and it was next to the yellow sign with the black J with the arrow, that would tell you that you're on Bravo, you're on taxiway Bravo. And if you made a right, you'd be going to Juliet. All right, that is the airport signs. All right, we are almost done. We just have to talk about lighting, and then that's it. All right, so for lighting, we have VASI. I actually have a couple slides on VASI because it's really important. So with VASI, if you look here, you can see how they have two boxes. There's different systems. There's lots of different systems that can give you a visual approach. And again, that's really important here, right? This is visual approach. So this doesn't help you land if you're in the clouds. So you have to be able to see the runway. And so if you see red, that means you are under it. If you see white, that means you are above it. So if you look at the left, we see two red. That means your airplane is in front of the front. You're too low. You're landing right at that point. You're landing in front of that first box. So you may land it before the runway even starts. And then the middle one, you can see you have a white for the front and you have a red for the back. So that means you're going to land past the first box and you're going to land before the red box. That means you are right on. You're going to land in between those two boxes, and that's where they want you to land. And now if you see two white, that means you're landing past both of them. You're too high. You're going to land past those boxes. Now there's a really cool picture here. This actually is one of the bigger airports over in the UK. I think it was Heathrow, which is near London. And if you look at this picture here, you can actually see how the red lights are down lower, and you can see how the white lights are angled higher. And then if you look towards the very end, you can see how the white is kind of towards the top and the red is kind of towards the bottom. And so that really shows you what's happening. They're literally just pointing two sets of lights at different angles. So if you are in the red, that means you're in that bottom one, and if you're in the white, you're in that top one. So that's pretty. I thought that was a great picture. All right, so here's a quick little video of somebody. They are landing with a VASI. And as you get closer here, you'll see the two lights. And this pilot's doing a great job. Well, at one point he had two white lights here. But he saw that and he brought it down a little bit. And you'll see that top box will turn red. It's red now. And so that means he's right on. And so that's great. If you hold that down, if you just watch those lights, it'll bring you all the way to the runway, right where you're supposed to be. Now there's another really used system, and you'll see this one for the mostly at the precision and non-precision airports, and they'll put 4 of these lights together, and that gives you a little bit more control of exactly where you are. So if all 4 of those are white, that means you're way high. If you see one that's white and the rest are, if you see 3 that are white, that means you're a little high. If you see 2 white, 2 red, you're right on. That's what you want. You're right in the middle. If you saw 3 red, it means you're a little low. And if you see 4 red, it means you're really low. And so again, they just put them at different angles. So I personally, that's the type of runway lighting that I like the best, is the PAPI. All right, airport beacons. So green and white means it is a ground airport. So I like to think of green as in grass. So if you've got grass, it's a ground airport. You have white and green. If you look at the video over to the right, you'll see the green and the white strobes. It's just a beacon that's spinning like this. And so when it crosses you and your eyes, it'll look like a flash. But it's not flashing. It's actually a spinning light. Now, if you are in the ocean, you're on a seaport, it will be yellow. So it sounds disgusting, but the way that I like to remember it and teach folks is that, green, think of green grass. You're on the ground. And if you're yellow, I don't know about you, but if you ever went to a friend's house that had a pool and they had those signs that say, welcome to my ool, notice there's no pee in it. It's disgusting. That's what I think of when I think of the water, right? So it's yellow for the water. Now, if you see 2 white flashes followed by a green flash and then 2 more white flashes followed by a green flash rotating around and around, that means it's a military airport. So you want to make sure that if you are going to land at a military airport, you have an incredible emergency, and you're talking to somebody, letting them know you're about to land there, or you have permission to land there in advance. You do not want to land at a military airport and they don't know you're coming. So you might get some people, to come visit you that may not be very friendly. Okay, so now, excuse me. So now we have I think this is our last slide. So we have our airport lighting, and here you can see this is a precision approach. This is a big airport. They have all the lights. They have lights they have visual indicators on the left-hand side. They have visual indicators on the right-hand side. I think that's really because, if one side failed, you want to make sure you have a duplicate. They have lighting going to the threshold, basically a big arrow. If you look at that from afar, right? To me, that's an arrow. That's an arrow pointing to the threshold. You can see this airport a mile away. Now, if you look to the left really quick, you'll see a flash. You'll see the green and the white flash. It's in the top left corner. And so there you can see your airport beacon as well. One thing I do want to add is at the smaller airports, you don't have this kind of lighting system. Sometimes you don't have any lighting system. Sometimes the airport just closes at dark. You can't land in the night without airport lighting. You will not be able to see that runway. It will basically look like a black hole surrounded by houses and buildings and roads. You won't be able to see it. And so what you do is if you're at an uncontrolled airport and they have what's called pilot controlled lighting, is you're going to be on the frequency you would usually talk to people, and you can click the mic. And depending on how many times you click, some airports are better. Sometimes you can control the intensity of the lighting by, say, 3 clicks means it's medium, 7 clicks means it's super bright, and then the lights will stay on for a certain amount of time before they will turn back off. And they do that so that they don't annoy the neighborhood with all the lights from the airport. But make sure that you do have lighting, and don't turn the lighting on so far in advance before you get to the airport that the lights could possibly turn off while you're in the middle of landing. Or if they do, make sure you can click it again really quick to get it back on. If you're in a really a murky area, the air is just kind of like gross, and you can see, but it's not really great. You can ask the air traffic control tower, if they have one, to turn up the intensity. They can't always do it. Sometimes they're already going to be at the highest amount because air traffic controllers, they're professionals, they know. So they're going to have it at full height. But if you wanted to, if you're having a hard time making out the runway, you could ask air traffic controllers to see if they can raise the lighting anymore. Sometimes they can control it. All right. All right, so I think we are done. Let's just go through and wrap up here. So I'm going to look down here as I'm reading. So the important terms we had: air traffic control, beacons, the controlled airports, the control tower, course. We didn't talk about the course. As when you're flying, the course is, when you're going from point A to point B, that line between point A to point B, that's your course. It's really simple. And then the FAA, we talked about those folks. Again, if you know anybody, give them thanks for all of us. They do an incredibly hard job, thankless job. But they're responsible for everybody's safety so much. The flight profile, we went into that in great detail. Flight service station, we talked about that. The heading, that's the direction the airplane's actually heading into in relation to the compass. And then a noise abatement, we didn't have a noise abatement. So noise abatement, a lot of people will buy houses, and they buy a house close to an airport. And then they get mad that I'm sorry, a little bit of politics here. But they buy a house next to an airport, and it's a little bit cheaper because it's next to an airport. And you have noises from the airport all day long and sometimes into the night. And then they complain about the noise from the airport. So one of the things that you really want to make sure you do, especially if you're in a noisy airplane, a big heavy jet, and if you're in a big heavy jet, you're not listening to this video. You've got your own training, but you want to try to get as much altitude as you possibly can, as fast as you can. It'll actually push the sound behind the airplane, so it'll, instead of going shallow and the noise travels further back, you go like this, and the noise will be pointed down more towards the runway. And also, as you get further out, every time you double your distance from noise, it lowers it by the square of it. So So the noise will quickly die down. And so there are abatement programs. Sometimes when you take off, you have to turn certain ways so you don't fly over certain communities. My personal opinion is, if you, again, politics, I guess, but if you buy a house near an airport, don't complain about the noise from the airplanes. We do our best, but please don't complain. Come hang out with us. You get to know us. We're good people. All right, so that is that. So congratulations. We actually, we did this in just about an hour, so great. I thought it was going to take an hour and a half. So you have now completed Chapter 2 of Module 2. So what you need to do now is go ahead, review Chapter 1 again, review Chapter 2. If you're watching this video tonight or a couple of days from the time that I upload this video, Chapter 1 is coming. We actually are releasing Chapter 2 in advance because a lot of the information we have for this chapter actually was in one of my weekly AE Live shows. So once you have it, go ahead and review Chapter 1, review Chapter 2 again. If you need to, watch these videos again, and then get with your cadet officers, your senior members. Say, hey, I'm ready. I want to take the test. Don't delay it. Just go get it done. You'll be happy. You're going to do great. If you've studied, you've read, you've watched these videos, you've got it. I have complete confidence you're going to rock this thing. Do me a favor. If you do great and you pass this test, leave everybody a message down below. Let them know that, hey, listen, these tests aren't that bad. I took the test and I got it. I passed it. It was great. The other thing too is don't try to pass a test with the minimum percentage. Nobody would want you to be a pilot if they knew that you just barely passed your classes. Try to really ace that thing. Just take it serious. Take it like you are in flight training. A lot of this information in these presentations are directly from flight manuals, and really take it serious. It'll really help you out. When you go to get your pilot's license for real, a lot of this stuff you're going to end up being reviewed. You're going to know it. So congratulations. You did a good job. If you get your pilot's license and you're in Oshkosh, or if you're a local here in Greenville, and we're at a pancake breakfast and you see a really big, tall, 6'8" guy like me, come say hi. I'd like to meet you. All right. With that, I think we're done. If these videos are helpful for you, do me a favor. Go ahead and subscribe. I got to do the YouTube thing, right? Go ahead and subscribe. Hit the like button. If you want to be alerted when more videos are coming out, we're trying to put out videos at least once a week, a lot of times twice a week. Go ahead and hit that bell icon, and it will actually alert you, especially for what I do because I go live. And so if you want to be part of our live audience and have conversations on the side, you can do so. I am going to go ahead and end the show, and I will look to see if anybody had questions on the side. With that, I hope you have a great day, and stay safe out there. Wash those hands, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much. Bye.